Good afternoon. This is English 3330, Contrastive Analysis of English and Spanish. And I am Professor James Rivera. Today, Monday, September 14, 2020, we're going to be going over the next topic within the course content outline, which still has not been distributed because it's still in the work in progress. So you have to bear with me on that issue as well. What I'm going to be focusing on today is the verb tenses or the use of verbs in English. So I'm trying to project here a whiteboard to see if I can at least write some things here for you to illustrate and not have to depend on the PowerPoint presentations, which are very static and sometimes are not as useful as providing the outline as we would have the board in the classroom. So let me see if I can do this. So first of all, how's everybody doing? I hope you're all doing okay. You're all in good health. I've received your assignments. I know that you're expecting feedback. On my side, everything has been somewhat hectic. So my intention is to give you some feedback in the upcoming week and a half, hopefully. And that way, you know how you're doing. But these first two assignments were just to get some momentum started. And since we're already up and running, now we can get to the grit, right? We're going to be talking about verbs today. What are the two major components of a sentence in English, Roberto? I can wait.
So, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of problems. Subject and the verb.
Subject and a verb, right? Very good. Subject and the predicate, right? So that second portion that Roberto mentions is he mentioned the nucleus of that second portion, which is possibly the most important part of it. So we talk about the predicate being that which is said about the subject, and the nucleus or the core of the predicate is the verb or the verb phrase. We will be using the expression verb phrase to refer to any expression that is used to communicate an action or a condition by way of nucleus of the predicate. Got that? So even if it's just one word, we will be referring to it as the verb phrase. So we have here right, so Eudaldo likes mango. And it was translated into manga because, of course, the system doesn't understand what mango is. So manga works as well. Endaldo is another name. So Endaldo, this is a very good name, likes manga. The verb phrase within that sentence is just one word, likes. All right, so this is one of the things that we studied when we were considering the structure of grammar. We refer to that expression within the sentence or the clause or the phrase that communicates an action or a condition as the verb phrase. And we know that the verb phrase can transfer or be simply one word. Now we could say, let me start using other names that probably the computer can understand better. This is probably one that I can understand. Carlos has eaten. Carlos has eaten. The verb phrase, of course, in this case are those last two words. So what we're going to be doing today and hopefully throughout this week and the next is reviewing to the T. The verb tense and form system, as well as its aspectual system in English. So we're going to be talking about forms, tenses, and aspects. Okay, so those are 2 verb forms. Very good. How many verb forms do we have in English? You've already given me 2. Who can tell a clear notion of in order to be able to teach them? We have to understand the concept form. We have to understand the concept tense, and the other concept is aspect, right? And these are abstract concepts, of course, but they help us to elicit expressions that provide temporality with the greatest accuracy than we can, of course, using spoken language. So these 5 forms are those that exist for every verb in English. There's only one verb in English that has more than 5 forms. So be, is, are, am, was, were, been, and being. Got that, right? All other verbs in English have base form, S form, past participle, and present participle. Of course, the verb be has these 8, but they correspond to those 5 forms that I've just mentioned. Ximena.
Professor, I don't understand the S form. Can you explain me about that?
The S form with the verb be, or the S form with other verbs?
No, with the other verbs.
Okay. We're on it. So the S form. You were talking about a little while ago, and they're supposed to be separate, but the program is putting them together. It's not form, but S form. You were talking about the third person singular, right? The third person singular is a subject form. However, yes, when we talk about the S form of the verb, it corresponds in the present tense to the correct conjugation of the verb with the third person singular subject. So when I say in the present, in the simple present, I say Ximena, and I want to say an action that you perform as a present fact, as a habitual action, or as a capacity or ability that you have to do something. I will always express it in the S form. So I will say Ximena paints or draws, however it may be, right? So this S that you have at the end, that's the S form. If I'm referring to Ileana and Emmanuel, I would say Ileana and Emmanuel right? So this you know how to do, right? Because this is conjugation. So to answer your question, Ximena, the S form is simply the form that we use in English for verbs conjugated in the simple present tense when the subject is third person singular. He, she, and it. Did you understand that?
Yes, Professor, thank you.
You're welcome.
I kind of knew that, but I wasn't sure if the S form was what I was thinking. And thank you.
All right, so let me just get a presentation here for you. Maybe it's easier for me to project that onto the screen. Here you have the verb forms. All right, so the base form, the S form, the past participle, present participle, and of course, we can identify verbs as to whether they're regular or irregular. the main difference between regular verbs from talk to die in comparison to irregular verbs from run to drink is that when you look at the past and past participle forms, regular verbs end in ed, always. However, irregular verbs don't end in ed. They change. So from run to ran, and the past participle form being run again. Now we can't say that they're always different because verbs such as make, you'll notice have past and past participle forms that are identical, but they don't end in ed. How do we know which ones are past participle and which ones are past? Well, we have to see them in context. That's the way in which we would know. With irregular verbs, on the other hand, you know which one is which, right? Drank and drunk, we know that drank is past form and drunk is past participle form. So this is what we've talked about before regarding verb forms. This is going to be rather slow because the test that we're going to be taking first will focus only on this. I'm going to give you a test 2 weeks from now that is going to focus solely on verb forms, tenses, and aspects. And it's what I'm going to require is that you be able to explain everything pertaining to how it is that the verb system in English functions. So this is something that I want you to remember. I want you to remember, well, what the verb in the sentence is. So we have to start from the very basic. The question that I asked Roberto a while ago, what are the two major components of a sentence? And he said, the subject and the predicate. So we know that the nucleus or the core of the predicate, which expresses action or condition, is the verb. So verbs will take a particular form, morphologically speaking, depending on what it is that we want to communicate with them. So verbs communicate temporality, meaning time. So we can have a graph, a line indicating different times in history, and we can express how it is that the idea that we want to communicate occupies the different spaces within that graph. So if I'm talking about an action that repeats itself or expresses a capacity or ability that a person has to do something in a static time, it's a factual idea, then I can express it in the simple present tense. And in order to do that, these are the two forms that I would be using, either the base form or the S form. Right? And that's what I was saying a moment ago using the example of Ximena paints. Right? So Ximena paints. And that's where we have to go back and consider our knowledge regarding subjects in a sentence. Subjects in a sentence can be one or multiple words that identify who or what the sentence is talking about. So if it's one individual, two individuals, we refer to the subject as a singular subject or a plural subject. And we have words that we use to substitute the one or multiple words that we use to express the subject. That's what we call subject pronouns, right? Forgive me if this sounds so elementary, but this is the way we have to go over it in order to make sure that we are covering all the details that are necessary for us to be able to internalize how it is that this system works. Because once we clarify all the details regarding how it is that the verb system in English functions, then we can proceed to compare with the rustic aspects of Spanish that may be necessary to consider when it is that we teach students who are part of a homogeneous Spanish-speaking group. All right, so when I consider the subject pronouns, I can from there determine which form of the verb I will use in each case. So, and here I don't have a graph, but you all know what the subject pronouns are. At this point, I should be able to tell you the first person singular, and you should be able to tell me the pronoun, right? I is the first person singular, we is the first person plural, you second person singular and plural, he, she, and it is the third person singular, which is what Ximena was talking about a while ago, and they third person plural. So since Ximena can be substituted for the word she, third person singular, I know that the form of the verb that I have to use in the simple present tense is the S form. Now, if I was talking about Ileana and Emmanuel as the second sentence that I provided, what I was doing, then that subject would not be she or he. However, it would be they. And they requires that I use, in the simple present tense, of course, the base form of the verb. All right? So that's what we were talking about in terms of the morphological construct of verbs in English. These different forms will occupy particular spaces depending on what it is that we want to communicate, what we want to elicit in terms of temporality within our expressions. So in English, we know that we have 12 verb tenses. Present, past, and future are the general tenses that we tend to refer to when we talk about verb tenses in English and most languages for that matter. However, the finer components when we refer to verb tenses are what Lisa has mentioned that apply to each of those three verb tenses. So every verb tense, be it present, past, or future, is going to have a simple tense. So in that sense, we refer to it as simple present, or simple past, or simple future. I ate. All right. So, and again, this is going to be repetitive in terms of what it is that we studied in grammatical structure of English, but that's good because we repeat, we get to review, and you get to do well on that test. So I ate is the simple past tense. I had eaten is the past perfect tense. Notice that in the second case, I had eaten, even though it's grammatically correct, it seems to be incomplete, right? It presumes that our interlocutor, the person whom we were speaking to, has some additional knowledge regarding the context of what it is that I'm saying. Because you don't simply say, I had eaten. About completion, right? That's what the aspectual nature of verbs means. See, the verb aspects are those really fine-tuning elements that help us to provide more specificity regarding the temporal nature of what I'm trying to express. So, I ate gives you a general idea of an action, right? You know that that action occurred before now because the verb form that you are using is the past form, and you would conjugate that past form regardless of what the subject is. I, we, you, he, she, it, they ate. So it gives us an idea of that particular action that comes to our mind when we think about eat, but in that form, in the past tense. Now, when I say I had eaten, here we have what we call the perfect aspect. So, right here, I had eaten before the class began. Right, so I hope you can see that. So there you have our sentence. Right, notice that second clause, is it a dependent clause or an independent clause? Well, we need to do a good review here, because, Manna, tell me.
That's dependent.
Which one?
Before the class began.
Why? Why is it dependent?
Because it's not telling us what happened before the class began. It's just saying before the class began what. It's
right.
Like it needs something else.
Very good. It can't stand on its own, right? That's what makes it dependent. It's a subordinate or dependent clause because it begins with a subordinating expression. Expressions such as before, after, until, when, while, if, right? We've studied these before. If we begin, thank you very much, Ximena. If we begin a clause with an expression of that nature, as Ximena correctly said, we have a dependent clause. On the other hand, I had eaten is an independent clause. I'm making this clarification because by definition, independent clauses can stand on their own and represent a complete sentence. And the expression I had eaten is, in fact, a complete grammatical sentence. However, in terms of being able to express coherence, we have a particular issue. It seems to be incomplete. One of the things that you were practicing in your minds, right, is how do I complete this sentence then? What do I do to make it sound complete? Well, the way that we make it sound complete is that since I'm dealing with a perfect tense, I have to take into consideration the fact that I'm dealing with an aspect, and when I'm dealing with an aspect, I'm always going to be referring to an action in relation to another. So going back, the present perfect tense is a tense that refers to an action that is complete, or in this case, the past perfect tense is a tense that refers to an action that is complete in relation to another action in the past. So the other action in the past is when the class began. I got that? So the class began, and that tense, or that moment, is what is static. What I'm expressing here is the action that is more specific. It's fine-tuned. And it tells me that this is something that was completed. It was done. It finished prior to something else, or in relation to something else. So the first one, and here's where it pays off, right? Fausto blank studying when I arrived yesterday. How do we complete that sentence grammatically? Fausto was studying when I arrived yesterday. This is what I would want you to see. So when you're talking about a sentence such as this one that you have here, Fausto was, as Katia correctly said, studying when I arrived yesterday. These are some things that I want you to be able to explain, and of course you have to comprehend them first. First of all, here we have a sentence that, as Katia said, is in the past progressive. When we're dealing with the past progressive, we know that we're talking about an aspectual detail regarding the verb tense. And as we said, one way to see this is that when we're talking about a verb aspect, is we're talking about fine-tuning it, right? Something is a minute detail which helps me to better understand a temporal aspect regarding what it is that I'm trying to explain. It's not just in the past, but it's something more within the past, right? It's the past progressive. So when we're talking about the aspectual nature of tenses, we're always doing so referring to what I'm trying to communicate in relation to another verb another verb tense or to another action. And that's why when you look at this sentence, you will notice that it has more than one clause, right? Fausto was studying could be a sentence all by itself. When I arrived yesterday is another clause. It happens to be a dependent clause because it begins with a subordinating expression with a relative pronoun, right? So when I arrived yesterday. When I arrived yesterday, what? Well, when I arrived yesterday, Fausto was studying. So these are some of the notes, some of the ideas that I would want you to be able to explain pertaining to the sentences that come up as we're studying the verb tenses. So not just that it's past progressive, is that it's of course an action that occurs in relation to another static activity or moment. What's that static moment? I arrived. I arrived at a particular moment in the past. When I arrived, there was something else going on. In each of these cases, we have to identify how it is that the verb tense is constructed mechanically. What I mean by this is, why do we use was in the first sentence and why do we use has in the second sentence and not were or have? And I know that you know the answer to this question, right? So we have to see that in the first sentence we have two clauses and therefore the sentence is a complex sentence. The first clause being the one that is central to making it a past progressive tense sentence because it's the central idea being expressed within the sentence. Otherwise, it would be simple past. And the reason for which we use was as a modal auxiliary is because the subject is third person singular. We know that the modal auxiliary was is used with subjects that are first or third person singular. In the second sentence, Mike has lived, something similar happens. Notice that the modal auxiliary par excellence that we use in the perfect tenses has to be the verb have in one of its forms. So this leads us to what we had studied before, the different formulas for verb tenses that you love so much, right? Present perfect equals, and that equals tells me what the verb phrase is going to be. Has or have plus the main verb in its past participle form. So each of the verb tenses has a formula. We say that the present perfect tense is has or have plus the past participle form of the main verb. So in the past, it's had plus the past perfect plus the past participle of the main verb. And in the future, as Katia said, we'll have plus the past participle form of the main verb. Okay? Now, each of those will, of course, depend on what the subject is. Now, an issue that we have in English is that there are certain tenses that are going to be the same no matter what the subject. The present perfect is going to change in its modal auxiliary depending on what the subject is, right? We reviewed I, we, you, he, she, it, they. Those are the subject pronouns or whatever words they substitute. If the subject is first person, second person, or third person plural, we will use the verb have. However, if we're talking about the present perfect with a subject that is third person singular, then we use has. In the past perfect or the future perfect, it doesn't matter. The modal auxiliary verb is going to be the same one, always going to be had. And in the future perfect, also will have. What's the tense for letter A? What tense is letter A? Leonor eats mondongo. I want you to review this, okay? this is something that I want you to take time to review. We have present, past, and future. Each of those tenses has a simple tense. So we have simple present, simple past, and simple future. Letter A in number 3 in that exercise that you see on the screen now, Leonor eats. Notice it's only one verb that expresses the action. So if it's one verb, it can't get any simpler than that, right? So it has to be simple. But simple by itself is not a verb tense. It has to be simple something. So since it's an action that is either repeated or elicits a capacity or an ability that someone has, right? So I don't think that people would say Leonor eats mondongo as, you know, it's a capacity or it's an ability that she has. She dedicates her life to eating mondongo. I don't think that that's what they're trying to say. Maybe it's something that she does recurrently. In any case, whichever may be the case, or whatever may be the case, it's still expressing an idea in the simple present tense. Now, letter B says Leonor ate mondongo. Simple past, very good. Simple past, only one verb, right? And it expresses an idea of something that was done before now. What about the letter C? Has eaten. Present perfect, very good. All right, so this is something that I need you all to brush up on, all right? So letter A is simple present, letter B is simple past, letter C is present perfect, letter D is what? Very good. Was makes it past, and since the main verb ends in ing, we know it's progressive. Right, so remember, always think about this first and last name thing. If it's simple, it has to be present, past, or future. Now, when it's perfect, when it's present, it has to be either perfect, progressive, or perfect progressive. If it's past, it has to be perfect, progressive, or perfect progressive. If it's future, it has to be perfect, progressive, or perfect progressive. In the case of letter D, as Ximena correctly pointed out, we know it's past because the verb was as modal auxiliary is used with past sentences, but it only indicates the primary tense, but its aspectual nature is indicated by the main verb. In this case, eating, since it's in its present participle form, we know that it's progressive. So from letter A to letter D, we have grammatically correct sentences. However, only one of them is the past progressive tense, as you indicated a moment ago. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have a test 2 weeks from today. Well, not really 2 weeks from today, but 2.5 weeks from now. So today's the 14th. You're going to have a test the last day of the month, September 30. That Wednesday, and it's going to focus on this topic. So we're going to be focusing on verb forms, verb tense, verb aspect. Now there's going to be peripheral material to cover. This Wednesday, I'm going to send you a handout, not with the content, but with the outline, because this is material that I presume you all understand. We're not going to be meeting until the Monday right before the test. Right, so Monday the 28th. What you should expect this week and the following week is to receive material from me. This Wednesday, or by this Wednesday, I'll be sending you the handout with the outlined material or the outlined topics that you need to be able to study for that test. And if there's any peripheral material that I think that you need to be able to consider, I'll be sending you that as well. If you have any further questions, I'll be available for you then. God bless you, take care, and this is goodbye for now.